Okay, thank you everybody for joining tonight's class. We are going to continue with the halachas of Shabbos. We just completed the siman about Kiddush B'Makom Suda, which is the last of the halachas of Kiddush, which takes us to the very next thing after Kiddush. After we make Kiddush, what comes next, Paul?
Challah.
Challah, you got it. The challah is next. And believe it or not, the challah has halachas too. That's right. Now, by the way, the word challah, does anyone know why we call it challah? Is challah like some Aramaic word for bread?
The mitzvah of taking challah?
That's right, hafrashas challah. The Aramaic word for bread, does anyone know what the Aramaic word for bread is?
Pas.
That's right. Oh, I was gonna make a little.
I thought pas was Hebrew.
The Ashkenazic way to pronounce it.
I thought
What?
pas was Hebrew.
No, Aramaic.
Oh.
You will not find the word pas in the Chumash, nowhere. But a Sephardic calls it pot. So there's they were doing lots of pot in the Talmud. That's what we see there. Okay, pardon the corny joke, but it comes with the territory. All right, pas. That word pas, by the way, if I'm sure you've heard the word pas Yisrael, right? Pas Yisrael. That means Jewish bread. Literally, it means bread baked by a Jew. It's using that word pas, bread, Yisrael, of a Jew. Pretty simple. But challah actually has nothing to do with the word bread. It doesn't mean bread in any way, shape, or form. Challah, as Paul said, is related to the word hafrashas challah, separation of challah. And that is a mitzvah from the Torah, one of the gifts to the Kohen, that when someone makes a sizable dough they're obligated to separate a portion of the dough. And that portion that needs to be separated is called challah. That is done nowadays. However, the way we do it nowadays is a little bit different because we do not have the means by which to keep all of the rules of spiritual purity properly. And Kohanim are also not operating the way that they would typically operate. So what we do is we separate the challah and then we burn it or destroy it or something like that, because it does have a status that makes it forbidden for a non-Kohen to consume. So it's really forbidden food. It's in a certain sense, one could even call it treif, as crazy as that sounds. That's really what challah is. Now, the mitzvah, there's an inyan, a mitzvah, a minhag, for someone to bake fresh bread for Shabbos, and kind of what goes along with that is the mitzvah of challah, of hafrashas challah, and many women make a whole to-do out of fulfilling the mitzvah of hafrashas challah on Erev Shabbos when they're preparing their challahs for Shabbos, etc., etc. So one could understand how those kind of combination of inyanim, of making fresh bread for Shabbos, and the mitzvah of hafrashas, the special mitzvah of separating challah, caused this Jewish vernacular of challah, that we refer to the breads as the challah. Some will call it the challah bread, but today most people just call it challah. So there you go. That's the challah. So what are the halachas of the challah? So we're familiar with a lot of the basics from just being at Shabbos meals and seeing how it's done. But why? Why are we doing this? And what really matters and what really doesn't matter? So let's delve into this. So the first thing is there's two things at play here. There's the essential idea of just having bread, period, a bread meal, and that's a concept of oneg Shabbos, of enjoying Shabbos, that one should have 3 meals every Shabbos. And what constitutes a meal? Bread. So that's the most basic need for bread, which is being fulfilled by the challah. The second thing, the second mitzvah or inyan that comes up when in regards to challah is something called lechem mishnah. Now the word mishnah is related to the word shnayim. Lechem obviously is bread. So lechem mishnah means double bread. So there's a concept of having 2 loaves at your Shabbos meals. Now, where does that come from? I think a lot of people are familiar with it. Anyone want to throw that out?
The man. The man, where you didn't collect man on Shabbos. You got 2 portions on Friday.
That's right. Double portion of man. What were you saying, Chaim? Did you mention
Lechem panim?
Go ahead. So explain the lechem panim. Go ahead. What do you mean by that?
It's the bread and the base of
The
mikdash.
showbread, the bread on the shulchan.
Right.
Correct. Now, here's where you're going with this, Chaim, because the lechem panim, the showbread, the bread that was on the shulchan in the Mishkan and later the base of mikdash, there's actually 12 loaves there.
Right, but that was who was it? It was the Rosh said that was the reason.
I said that was the reason. Okay. I think I should
have to look it up again, but there was a connection between the lechem panim and
there's a connection for sure. There is, by the way, there's a fascinating minhag from the Arizal. The first time I saw this like really done properly, I was like, whoa, it's quite a sight. But there's a minhag from the Arizal to actually use 12 loaves at your Shabbos meal.
Wow.
Try to pull that off. That's something exciting. Just to see that. And that's because of the lechem panim, exactly that. So I was at this Yerushalmi meal in by one of these real Jerusalem Jews that is, his great grandfather came over with the Vilna Gaon, one of those types, who's been there his whole life, and he did it, and it was wild. It was just like this tower with like the challah cover over it. It's pretty amazing. But for him, it actually made a lot of sense because he needed all that challah, because this was like one of these open houses, one of these famous Jerusalem open houses, where he would just pick up any random person that looked like maybe they needed a place to go for Friday night and just gather them in. It was quite the experience. Anyways, nothing like a Yerushalmi Yid. So special people out there. Okay, here we go. So we have lechem panim and we have the mun. So we're going to focus on the mun, the manna, as it's said in English, the mun that fell which sustained the Jews while they were traveling through the Midbar. And what happened was no mun fell on Shabbos. They were not going to go collect the mun on Shabbos. So what are they supposed to do? How are they going to eat if they're not collecting mun on Shabbos? So a double portion of mun fell on Erev Shabbos, lechem mishnah, and that double portion of mun provided for Erev Shabbos and Shabbos. By the way, I never really understood how that lines up with 3 meals until recently. I was in Baltimore and I heard a shiur from one of the Rabbi at Ner Yisrael. And just like totally as a tangential comment, this was not at all his focus. He mentioned, you know how it works? He said, it's simple. In the good old days, the standard was 2 meals a day, not 3. There's a lot of clear sources about this in the Talmud and Mishnah, etc. There was your day meal and your night meal. That's how it was. So with the mun, the portion of mun that a person got every single day, it fell in the morning and it was divided into 2 meals, right? You had your day meal and then the second half of it you ate for your night meal. So when you get a double portion of mun that falls on the morning of Erev Shabbos, guess how it gets divided? If it's 2 portions, that's really 4 meals worth. So 1 meal is for your day meal of that day, i.e. Erev Shabbos. And then what does that leave you? 3 more meals for Shabbos. 1 for Friday night, and then 2 for Shabbos day, 1 for the morning, and then 1 for the evening as Shabbos is coming to an end, which is what we know as Shalosh Shudas. I thought that was so fascinating, so simple, so interesting. Anyways, there you go. So that's our lechem mishnah. And to remember as a zeicher to the lechem mishnah, the double portion of mun that fell, we have a mitzvah to have 2 loaves of bread at each of our Shabbos meals. So now let's get into some of the details of what that means. Now, when we say two, ideally there should be two complete loaves that are used. There is a very interesting, you only need to be holding two to fulfill the mitzvah of Lechem Mishnah. You do not need to eat them both to fulfill the mitzvah of Lechem Mishnah. The Mishnah Berurah even comments that that someone who that if someone, no, I'm sorry, I'm mixing things up. He's talking about a different concept. But the bottom line is that if someone's short on their number of whole rolls, they could just use two for each. They could use two and then save one of those two for the next meal, and then that way they could get through Shabbos with 4 loaves, right? Because you'll only eat one at each of your meals, and then you'll have one extra all the way through, so that you'll have 2 at each of your 3 meals when you really had 4 loaves instead of 6. What the Mishnah Berurah that I was thinking of, I was mixing things up. He was talking about trying to save savings, but he's talking about the fact that there are some, the Shalah and the Rashal, both had a minhag to cut both loaves and to eat them both at their meals, not to save one of the 2. This is apparently also sourced in the Rashba and the Vilna Gaon. So those are some pretty solid sources for this minhag. The Shulchan Aruch doesn't follow this, and the more common minhag is not to necessarily cut them both. Many people do if they have a lot of guests or just a big family, and they need a lot of challah. So, as practicality, sometimes it happens that way. But most people don't have this minhag that they specifically cut them both. However, there is a real minhag that follows that. So the Mishnah Berurah raises the point, and again, I think we've mentioned this in previous shiurim, that the Mishnah Berurah lived in Radin, and the community in Radin was extremely poor. So there are many areas in the Sfarim of the Mishnah Berurah where he kind of addresses, well, what's a poor person supposed to do about this? So if you're going to cut both loaves, if that's your minhag, then what's a poor person going to do about this? That now you've got to have 6 chalos to get through Shabbos instead of 4. So the Mishnah Berurah says, interesting, he goes out of his way to say, I've got a good idea for you. What you could do is, of your 6 loaves, only 3 of them have to be full-size chalos, enough for your entire family to eat. The second one could be real small. So make yourself 3 full-size chalos, 3 little challah rolls, and then you're good to go. You'll cut them all up, 2 at each meal, and you're still going to be probably cutting up a similar amount of challah as the fellow who's using 4 full-size challahs. So that's the Mishnah Berurah I was thinking of, and that's also an interesting 2 different minhagim about whether to cut one or cut both. Okay, now which one of them should you cut? The top or the bottom? Now, first of all, the poskim don't say straight out anything about putting them on top of each other versus side by side, but the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah talk about should you cut the top one or the bottom one. So they seem to be assuming you're stacking them one on top of the other. That seems to be the assumption. So now, which one do you cut, the top or the bottom? So in all scenarios, with one exception, meaning, or whatever, the bottom line is you cut the top one except for Friday night. Friday night, the Ramah says Friday night you should cut the bottom challah, but Shabbos day you should cut the top challah, and Yom Tov meals, even Yom Tov night, you should cut the top challah. That's what the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah say. Why? I don't know. The Ramah, this is actually a very uncommon occurrence, but you have it here. The Ramah writes, "V'hatam hu al derech haKabbalah." The reason for this is based on Kabbalah. There's plenty of minhagim that are based on Kabbalah, but to have a Ramah bring down a minhag and to tell you it's from Kabbalah, you're going to have to look far and wide through the Shulchan Aruch to find that one. That's very uncommon. But you got it right here in the halachas of challah for Shabbos. So it's based on Kabbalah. There's a lot. I heard someone once explain it to me. There's a shamor and a zachor. There's like a dichotomy to Shabbos from those two mitzvahs of to guard the Shabbos and to remember the Shabbos. And one of them lines up with the male, and one of them lines up with the female. And Shabbos day and Shabbos night each correlate with one or the other, and that's why the top challah, the bottom challah. Fascinating idea. Anyways, moving on. All of the meals, the top challah. Now, the posting of a fascinating idea. There's a fascinating question here. If you're cutting the bottom challah, you're going to run into a halachic problem, and that is ein ma'avirin al mitzvos. One is not supposed to pass by a mitzvah. So now, the simple scenario of that is, a mitzvah opportunity comes your way, you shouldn't just pass it right by. But this comes up in more technical circumstances as well. For example, putting on your tefillin, the post can talk about you want to arrange your tefillin so that you grab the one that you're supposed to put on first, you grab that one first, i.e. your tefillin shel yad. Because if you grab your tefillin shel rosh first, to then put it down and grab your tefillin shel yad is ma'avirin al mitzvah. You're passing by a mitzvah. You got a mitzvah in your hand and you're putting it down. That's questionable, not ideal. So here as well, the Taz asked the kasha, asked the question, you're going to cut the bottom challah, you're passing by the top challah, right? You can't get to the bottom one without moving away the top one. So the chora, you should have a problem with ma'avirin al mitzvahs. So the solution that the post can recommend, the Mishnah Berurah brings, is you just pop out the bottom challah a little bit. So you arrange them such that the bottom challah is a little closer to you than the top challah. And then that way, when you finish your bracha, you can kind of just slide off that top challah and keep the bottom one and cut that up. And that's not going to be considered passing by a mitzvah, because the bottom challah is actually the one that was closer to you anyways. So you're not like passing by the top challah to get to the bottom one. You're grabbing the one that's closer. That is the recommendation. Obviously, Shabbos day, where you're going to cut up the top challah, you don't have to worry about any of that. But that is what the post can recommend here. Okay. Now, a couple of other ideas about the shalim challah. Now, as an aside, none of this is ma'akev. Now, what do I mean by ma'akev? What I mean is, I don't have two full challahs. All I've got is I got stuck on the road for Shabbos, had to pull into a hotel. I stopped at the Walmart and grabbed whatever I could get to make it through Shabbos. And of course, I'm not finding full challahs in Walmart. So what do I've got? I've got Wonder Bread. I've got sliced bread. I've got Arnold's sliced bread. Whatever it is, you still make your Shabbos meal with whatever bread you got. The fact that you weren't able to get two challahs doesn't mean that you shouldn't have a bread meal. You should definitely have a bread meal. Not only that, the post can say you should also do whatever you can to have some form of lechem mishnah. So if all you got is sliced bread, guess what? Take two slices and make your hamotzi holding two slices of bread. That's what you'll do.
Rabbi, if you have a pull apart challah and you take all the pieces off, can you use it the next day to do with the pieces for lechem mishnah?
Great question. So depends on what you mean by a pull apart challah. So if you mean a real pull apart challah, like a Zamek's pull apart challah, where it's designed to be one challah, and just the way they made it was they took balls of dough and just jammed them together so that it breaks easy in your hands. That's really one challah. So those pieces are not shelling. Those are not challah rolls. There's a different scenario which is very similar but is different, which is, and this came up when I was in yeshiva in Baltimore. There was a bakery in Baltimore called Rosendorf's, and they had the most delicious challah rolls.
Oh yeah.
And the way that they bake their challah rolls is they pack them pretty tight, on the baking tray, and as they expand and bake, they bump into each other a little bit. And it's not uncommon to have a bag of 6 challah. That's typically how they sell it, a bag of 6. And you could pull them, slide them out of the bag, and they'll hang there. If you're real gentle, they'll hang there because they're attached to each other. So this, of course, was, a whole debate, in yeshiva, you got to debate everything. Is that lechem mishnah? Is that not lechem mishnah? Oh, you're pulling it apart. It's one big challah. It's not 6 challahs. No, it's 6 challahs. No, it's 1 challah. What's the bottom line psak? The bottom line psak is, even if they end up getting stuck together, but if they're meant to be separate challahs and they just happen to bump into each other, they're separate challahs. So that in many ways resembles a pull apart challah. That's why I wanted to just mention this, Paul. But that would be 6 separate challahs, and you could take that apart and use that as 6 separate challahs. But your example of like the one, challah that happens to be a pull apart challah, that's 1 challah, and then once you pull it apart, it's not shalom anymore.
How can you use sliced bread? That's not shalom either.
Correct. So my scenario with the sliced bread was where you don't have anything else. What I was trying to say is that even in that scenario where you get stuck with no shalims available at all, that you should still do what you can to create some form of a lechem mishnah with what you've got. But in terms of what you should choose when you go shopping or when you're baking, you should have 2 separate shalim challahs. Now, there's some really interesting halachas when it comes to shalim. Shalim is in many ways a function of appearance, and there are some interesting halachas regarding shalim. So let's just run through a few of the common scenarios. Let's say you have a loaf of bread that was cut into, not cut all the way through, but there's a nice deep gash in that challah. Is it shalom or is it not? So it depends. What does it depend on? If you would lift it from the smaller portion, meaning from where the cut is, would it fall apart? Is the cut so deep that the challah would fall apart? If the answer is yes, it will fall apart, then it is considered not shalom already, even though it's technically still attached. But the cut is so deep that cut is considered separating the challah into 2 pieces because it will not hold together. If it will hold together, then it is shalom. So it is still considered shalom, even though it has a cut in it. So the fact that it has a cut in it, it's not perfect, doesn't mean that it's not shalom. An even more extreme example of this is there are some poskim who say that even if it's missing a piece, but if it's a very small piece, it could also be considered a shalom. This is particularly relevant with matzah. And matzah is very handy. This is just a good halacha tip. Keep a box of matzah in your pantry, because then when you forget to get yourself a challah or whatever, and it's instant lechem mishnah. It's the easiest thing. You just take it out of the box, and it's a whole loaf of bread. It's flat and crunchy, but it's a loaf of bread. As far as halal is concerned.
Unless you're Sephardi.
Oh, that's right. Unless you're Sephardi, then it's just a big cracker. Which that's a whole interesting topic in its own for another time. Okay, but be that as it may, that's the story with matzah. So what is that amount? What I saw quoted in the Sefer is 1/48. So try to figure that one out. I'm not sure how. A little more than 2%. So I guess if you're really good with assessing the approximate value of bread pieces, then you're in good shape. For most of us, it's going to be a little challenging. With a matzah, you could probably eyeball it decently. Is this 2% or is this more? The bottom line is where this is really relevant you see a little tiny microscopic chip off the corner of your matzah, you don't have to go get OCD on your lechem mishnah. You'd be like, okay, it's okay, it's good to go. Now, whatever, I'm making light of the OCD thing, but just as an aside, it's important to be aware that that halacha becomes a real significant problem for someone who suffers from OCD. It's a real serious thing. Hand washing in particular is something that people with OCD really struggle with because they just have to do it over and over and over again because I didn't do it right. So it's really not a laughing matter. But getting back to our matzah, tiny little something wrong with it, you can still count that as a shalom. That's the bottom line. The last thing I want to say, this is the most interesting. Let's say your pull apart challah example, or maybe that's not such a good example. But let's say the classic miscommunication between husband and wife, right? Wife made exactly 4 challahs for Shabbos. Husband has no idea. So what does he do? Friday night, right in the beginning of Shabbos, boom, he cuts straight through them both, right? Meanwhile, his wife, who washed and can't, as he's like, going, what's the matter? Right? That's the beauty of not being able to talk after you wash your hands. It makes things exciting. So now we have a catastrophe. Husband has done it again. He cut the second challah, and now we don't have enough for lechem mishnah for all 3 meals. What are we gonna do? So guess what? Husband pulls out a toothpick and says, "Look, honey, half a challah, toothpick, put them together, whole challah. Ta-da!" Right? Sounds like a joke, but it ain't. The poskim actually say, if it looks shalem, it is shalem. And if that's all you've got, you could actually do that. So if for whatever reason that's what you end up with, because you accidentally cut that challah in half, and then you realize, wasn't supposed to do that. It's not a lost cause. You actually can and should keep those 2 halves intact and stick them together so that it resembles a shalom. Paul, you probably want to say something.
I was just going to remark, it's fortunate that 2 toothpicks can maintain shalom bias.
That's right. Toothpicks can save a marriage. Always make sure that's the big tip from all the marriage coaches. Make sure to keep toothpicks in your in your cabinet. Amazing what a toothpick can do. Okay, here we go. Okay, so that's the bottom line when it comes to a whole challah. Some of those details, but getting back to the basics, you want 2 whole challahs for all 3 meals. Okay, let's get into a little more of the cutting up the challahs and distributing the challahs. Okay, Sif Beis mitzvah l'b'tzor b'Shabbos prusa gedola shetas b'glo l'kol hasuda. When you cut yourself a piece of challah, you should ideally cut yourself a big enough piece of challah that should be sufficient for the entire meal. Now, the Mishnah Berurah makes an interesting point here and says, "V'lo michzi karav vasa." This doesn't look like someone who is starved and just like a little gluttonous, maybe you might say. Whoa, cutting himself like this one big fat piece of bread all in one shot. Why? Because as long as that's not what you're doing on a regular basis, you're only doing that on Shabbos, it's clear that why are you really doing this? Because you love Shabbos so much, you're so excited for the challah, for the Shabbos meal, you cut yourself a nice big piece. That's the idea. So that is, that's where that comes from. And it's interesting because you'll find this in halacha. There's a real sensitivity to etiquette in terms of like sizes of pieces of food. Like there's a halacha that it's brought down in halacha, and you shouldn't eat from a giant piece of food. So there's all types of questions that are brought up. A sub, a slice of pizza, a sandwich, a lot of things that are bigger than the size that the Shulchan Aruch says, than what the poskim say is a no-no. So there's what to talk about that, but that's not for tonight's share. And the poskim have ways to resolve those issues. But here's an example of that: cutting yourself a big piece of challah. Who I don't know if I wouldn't even realize that's something questionable. But the poskim are telling us that really that's not something appropriate to do on any day except for Shabbos. On Shabbos, that's not just okay, that's a good thing to do. It's ideal because that shows your love and your excitement for that mitzvah. Okay, let's continue now with Sif Gimel. Everyone else at the meal should not begin eating their challah before the person who made hamotzi eats his challah. If everyone has lechem mishnah in front of them, they have their own two rolls. Then they're allowed to taste from their challah, even though the person who made hamotzi did not eat yet. So what's interesting is, and the Mishnah Berurah makes this clear, is that this last scenario where everyone has their own lechem mishnah, they could go ahead and eat before the fellow makes the bracha. That's even though they were yotzei with his bracha. They did not make their own bracha. They were yotzei with him. Nonetheless, in this scenario where they have their own lechem mishnah, it's okay for them to go ahead and eat before he eats. Now, what's the difference? This really is not so much a halachic element to motzi v'yotzei with covering someone else with your own bracha. There's actually a derech eretz. This is an etiquette halacha that if you need that fellow's bracha, you need his lechem mishnah to fulfill your obligation. It's not appropriate for you to be eating from it before him. Wait for him. But if you don't need him, you have your own lechem mishnah sitting right in front of you. You just happen to have been motzi with him this time. Then that's a different story. Then it's not inappropriate for you to eat before he eats. Very interesting. Okay, now getting back to the motzi v'yotzei stuff. So the standard halachas apply that he has to have you in mind. You have to have in mind that you're being covered by him. In addition, it's not just a hamotzi that covers everybody at the table, but lechem mishnah is also covered by everyone at the table. You don't need everybody at the table to have their own two roles for the mitzvah of lechem mishnah. The fact that one person has two loaves and he's having in mind everybody at the table, that counts for everybody at the table, and therefore everyone has fulfilled their obligation of lechem mishnah.
Could you be motzi if a woman makes a motzi?
I'm so glad that you brought up a woman. Yes, the answer is yes. And certainly in terms of hamotzi, I'm saying a woman has the same obligation to make a bracha before eating food as a man in all scenarios. But even regarding lechem mishnah, because the Mishnah Berurah says an interesting thing here, that even though this is a time-bound mitzvah, a woman is obligated because it is related to the miracle of the man. And the Mishnah Berurah applies the concept, really quoting earlier poskim, av him ba'osa nes. Gam anashim mechuyavos b'lechem mishnah shegam came b'nes haman. They were also included in the miracle of the man. This is a concept that we find in different areas of halacha, such as Megillah. Av him ba'osa nes. They were also included in the miracle of Purim, and therefore they're also included in the mitzvah, which is to remember the miracle of Purim. Here as well, women also experienced the lechem mishnah of the man, and therefore women also have the same mitzvah of lechem mishnah as a man has. So that is that's the story with women. Okay, one more second. Regarding being motzi, one other thing the Mishnah Berurah adds, which is something that we see, but it's interesting to see it, the Mishnah Berurah comment on it, is that when you're covering everybody else and they're being you're being motzi them, you should say birshus before you make the hamotzi. Now, what does birshus mean? It means with permission. You're essentially declaring that I'm doing this. There's what's the English way to do it? I don't know. I'm not thinking. I'm blanking. But again, a derech eretz type of thing, an etiquette issue.
Would you say birshus if your children are? Is it just you and your children?
That's what it sounds like. Let me read to you the Mishnah Berurah. Even though he's the balabais, he's the owner, the homeowner, or the greatest in stature, and therefore he doesn't really need anybody's permission. It's kind of his prerogative to go ahead and be the one to be making hamotzi. Nonetheless, it's still appropriate to say birshus. This is out of humility. It's an act of humility that a person declares the kind of like, may I have your permission, please, before going ahead with the hamotzi, even when it's not. It's his right to go ahead and do it. Okay, let's try to wrap things up now with one or two more things. Okay, here we go. Last sif. The Friday night meal and the Shabbos morning meal cannot be done without bread. Why is he mentioning this? He's mentioning this because of Shalosh Shudas. Shalosh Shudas, the third meal, can be done without bread. There's a number of different opinions about what is acceptable for Shalosh Shudas. Everyone agrees bread is acceptable. The next level down is mini mizonos type of items, and then there's something called mini targima, like filling foods, which would be like your fish products, that type of thing. And then the last one is peiros, fruit. Is fruit good enough? So the bottom line halacha is that one could fulfill their mitzvah of shalosh shudas of the third meal without bread. And in contrast to that, the Mishnah Berurah, but let me finish my sentence. But it's ideal to have bread for shalosh shudas, which is why many people make an effort to have bread for shalosh shudas. And once you're having bread, it needs to be like a mishnah. You need to have 2 loaves. The other 2 meals, however, that's what the Shulchan Aruch is getting at. Even though the bottom line halacha is that for shalosh shudas you do not have to have bread, but for the other 2 meals, for the Friday night meal and for the Shabbos morning meal, there you are required to have bread. There is no dispute about that, and therefore it's different than shalosh shudas. You do have to do that. The Mishnah Berurah adds one more interesting thing. Let's say for whatever reason, a person does not have access to bread on Friday night, but they will have access to bread on Shabbos day. Then they have to do a makeup meal. They're supposed to do 3 meals on Shabbos day, because you need to have 3 meals, and you didn't have a meal on Friday night. Now, Friday night, you have a mitzvah of Kiddush. You still have to try to fulfill your mitzvah of Kiddush, and you still have to try to fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush b'makom suda, right? Because you need that for a valid Kiddush. You need the Kiddush to be in the place of a meal. So you end up with this very unusual split where you're going to do like a b'diavad meal on Friday night, where you'll have you'll have like a cookie or something to be a kazayis of mizonos, because that's all you've got, and that's good enough for your kiddush to be a valid kiddush. And then you'll have 3 bread meals on Shabbos day. Hope it's a long day. And the other option, if you don't have a cookie, is you just drink that the extra revius of wine, the extra glass of wine, and then you cover it that way as well. That is the story. That is the story there. But of course, the ideal situation is to have your bread meal Friday night, and then the bread meal number 2 Shabbos morning, and then ideally shalosh should also be a bread meal with lechem mishnah. But as we mentioned, that one meal is not an absolute obligation, and they're all alternative options. Okay, Yishikoyach, thank you everyone for joining. That concludes our halachas of the challah.